You weren't there when she needed you." My mother said it loud enough for the whole Thanksgiving table to hear. I was still looking at the missed call from the hospital on my phone when everyone turned toward me. The screen had gone dim once already. I tapped it awake again, like I could change the timestamp if I stared at it long enough. 2:17 a.m. Unknown hospital extension. Missed. My father set his fork down beside his plate and gave my mother the same warning look he used whenever he thought she was about to say the ugly part too plainly in front of witnesses. But he didn't stop her. He never stopped her when the cruelty served him too. "She called you," my mother said. "And you didn't answer." No one spoke. Not my sister Lauren, sitting across from me with both hands around a glass she hadn't touched. Not my brother-in-law Mark, who kept his eyes on the turkey platter as if looking directly at me might force him to choose a side. Not my Aunt Denise, who had gone very still with her napkin still open across her lap. Nobody said a word. They just looked. At me. At the phone. At the one moment I had already replayed so many times in private that it no longer felt like memory. It felt like punishment. What nobody at that table knew was that they had made sure I never could have been there. The dining room looked exactly the way my mother liked it at holidays. Silver polished, candles lit, turkey centered. Her good china out like grief itself ought to sit up straighter in a nice room. Even loss had rules in our family. Cry quietly. Blame neatly. Never let a broken thing ruin the table setting. I sat near the middle, not at the end. That mattered. If you place someone close enough to the center, accusations land harder because they have nowhere to hide. The sweet potatoes were beside me. The stuffing was near my father. Lauren had the cranberry dish no one ever actually ate, but my mother served every year because Thanksgiving, to her, was never about what people wanted. It was about what looked right from a distance. My plate was barely touched. I hadn't come because I wanted a holiday meal. I came because the invitation itself felt wrong. After the funeral, they had gone quiet in a deliberate way. Texts answered late, calls not returned. My sister's updates reduced to 3-word messages that told me nothing and ended everything. Then, suddenly, Thanksgiving. My mother's voice on the phone, thin and careful. "It would mean a lot to the family if you came." Not to her, not to Lauren, to the family. That was how things were done when someone needed me present for a reason they didn't want to name. I called back, I said. My voice surprised even me. Flat. Steady. Not weak. Not shaking. Years of surviving my family had at least given me control over tone. My mother folded her hands. Too late. There it was. Not screamed. Not dramatized. Placed carefully into the room like a centerpiece. Too late. That phrase had followed me for weeks. Too late to answer. Too late to get there. Too late to matter. And because they were smart enough not to accuse me directly, they let implication do the rest of the work. That was always their style. Never say the unforgivable thing clearly when you can let other people finish it in their own heads. If I had answered, maybe she wouldn't have died. That was the story they wanted the table to absorb without ever having to defend. My father finally leaned back in his chair and said, "We're not doing this tonight." But he didn't say she was wrong. I looked at him. Then why bring it up? My mother gave a short, brittle laugh. Because pretending isn't helping anyone. Pretending. That word almost made me smile. I had spent years paying for what they now claimed I had abandoned. Years sitting in plastic hospital chairs while my coffee went cold. Years driving through the night because a nurse called and I knew Lauren would be too overwhelmed. Mark too checked out. My parents too good at loving tragedy from a distance. And now pretending was the problem. Mark cleared his throat. Maybe we should just eat. Lauren still hadn't looked at me. That hurt more than my mother's voice did. Children know who shows up for them. Even when the adults around them edit the truth, children know who answers, who brings the right blanket, who remembers which side the IV bruises worse, who asks the nurse the questions nobody else wants to hear answered. My niece knew. She used to call me her steady person. That was what she called me once, smiling through oxygen tubing, 1 week after the second surgery. "You're the steady one," she whispered. I still hear that sometimes when the room gets quiet enough. Not every memory of her is painful, but every painful memory now has my family standing just behind it, rewriting what she and I actually were to each other. If you've ever been blamed for something you couldn't control, you already know how fast other people can get comfortable with your guilt. Aunt Denise shifted first. Maybe this isn't the time. That sentence annoyed me more than my mother's accusation. Because there is never a time, in families like mine, not when the child is sick, not after the child dies, not at the funeral, not at the holiday table. The truth is always badly timed when it threatens the wrong people. My mother looked at me over the candles. She needed you. That's all I'm saying. No, it wasn't. What she was saying was that I had failed a dying child. What she was saying was that the last phone call mattered more than the years before it. What she was saying was that everyone at the table should look at me and think the thing she was too polished to say outright. I locked my phone and set it beside my untouched plate. The missed call stayed there in my mind anyway. That one small glowing object had become their weapon. They didn't know it wasn't the only thing I had brought. She used to call me when she couldn't sleep. Not Lauren, not my mother, not her father. Me. Sometimes it was after midnight. Sometimes closer to morning. Sometimes from a hospital bed. Sometimes from her room at home after another round of treatment had left her wired and exhausted and too scared to say that part out loud. "Can you stay on the phone with me?" she'd whisper, and I always said yes. I would move whatever meeting I had the next day. I would answer from my car. I would answer from the parking lot outside my office. I would answer from grocery store lines, from my kitchen, from hotel rooms when I traveled for work, from a bathroom stall once at a charity event, because she had called twice in a row, and that was enough for me to know something was wrong. I answered. That mattered because by Thanksgiving, everyone had been taught to focus on the one time I didn't. But a life is not built on one missed call. A lie is. I still have the hospital bracelet from one of her earlier procedures. Thin white plastic. Her name printed in black block letters. The edges worn from being in my bag too long. They cut it off her wrist after surgery because she hated how tight it felt, and she looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "Take it, please." So I did. Not because it was valuable, because it was hers. It's strange the things grief chooses to preserve. Not the big symbolic objects people expect. Not photographs in frames or cards full of kind words. Sometimes it's a piece of plastic that smells faintly like antiseptic and tape adhesive because your body understands before your mind does that one day someone may try to tell the story wrong. She called me her steady person the winter before she died. I had brought her fuzzy socks because the oncology wing was always colder than it needed to be, and she hated cold floors. Lauren had been crying in the hallway. Mark was on the phone arguing with insurance. My parents had come for 20 minutes, brought flowers, no child in treatment wants, and left before the doctor came back with the scan results, because my mother said she couldn't stand this atmosphere. I stayed. When the nurse came in to adjust the line in her arm, my niece squeezed my fingers and whispered, "You always come." I kissed her forehead and said, "I always will." That promise is one of the reasons the missed call almost killed me before the truth did. I had built my place in her life quietly. Not performatively. Not as the favorite aunt who made a show of devotion in front of the family. I paid attention. I knew which crackers she tolerated after chemo. I knew the stuffed rabbit she pretended she'd outgrown, still traveled under her left arm on bad nights. I knew she liked the blue blanket more than the pink one because the pink one smelled too much like the house by the time things got worse. My family knew those things too. That's what makes what they did impossible to forgive. They didn't cut out some distant relative. They cut out the person she actually counted on. At first, the exclusion was subtle enough to excuse. Updates came later than they used to. Then they got shorter. Then they stopped unless I asked. The hospital group thread I had been part of went quiet on my end. When I texted Lauren, she replied hours later with vague things that told me nothing. "She's resting. Long day. We'll update later." Later rarely came. When I called, she'd say, "We didn't want to bother you." That word bothered me every single time. Bother. As if caring too much had become inconvenient. As if showing up had made me difficult instead of dependable. The first time I asked directly whether something had changed, Lauren said, "Mom thinks we should keep things simpler." Simpler. That was another family word. It usually meant I was being quietly removed from something they no longer wanted me to witness. I should have pushed harder then. I should have gone around them sooner. I should have trusted the discomfort in my chest instead of the old training that told me keeping peace mattered more than naming patterns. But I didn't. Because grief makes people generous to those who don't deserve it. You keep thinking their coldness must be exhaustion, their silence must be overwhelm, their failures must be pain. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're strategy. Have you ever replayed one moment over and over, only to realize the real story started much earlier than you thought? The week before everything collapsed, she left me a voicemail I didn't get until it was far too late. I only know that now because I found the record later. Not the message itself. That's one of the cruelties I still can't fully sit with. There was a voicemail. I know there was. The hospital system logged it. The nurse's note referenced it. But I never heard her voice that last time because somewhere between her bed and my phone, somebody made sure that call wouldn't reach me the way it should have. At Thanksgiving, while my mother sat there acting like one missed call had defined my relationship to that child, all I could think about was the 100 answered ones that had been erased. One night, 6 months before she died, she called because she was afraid to sleep before a procedure. "Can you tell me something normal?" she asked. So I told her about the dog in my building who hated the elevator, about the terrible office coffee, about the rainstorm that had knocked over a trash can outside my window. She laughed halfway through and said, "I like when you talk like everything is regular." I asked, "Do you want me to stay on?" She said, "Until I fall asleep." I stayed. That was who I had been to her. Not late, not absent, not guilty. Steady. My family knew that, which meant they also knew exactly what they were destroying when they started building the opposite version of me. The first time I realized something was truly wrong wasn't dramatic. It was administrative. 2 days passed without an update from the hospital. That had never happened before. Even on the busiest weeks, even when Lauren was overwhelmed and Mark disappeared into his own useless version of stress, somebody texted me. A nurse. My niece herself when she was up for it. Once even the social worker, because I was the one who had handled the financial paperwork and she assumed I was still the right person to call. Then nothing. No text. No voicemail. No nurse update. No billing alert. Nothing. I called the floor. No answer. I called Lauren. Straight to voicemail. I called again an hour later. No answer. By the third call, something in me had gone cold. Not panic yet. Recognition. The feeling you get when a pattern you've been trying not to see finally becomes too clear to deny. I drove to the hospital without telling anyone I was coming. I remember the parking garage ticket spitting out into my hand. I remember the smell of stale coffee in the lobby and the Christmas wreath near the reception desk because it was that season already. The season when public places start decorating around private disasters as if nobody inside is breaking. I walked to the desk on her floor and gave the nurse my name. She typed, stopped, looked at the screen, then looked back at me with the professional caution people use when they know the information in front of them belongs to your life, but they are no longer permitted to treat you like part of it. "I'm sorry," she said. "You're not listed as an authorized contact." I thought she had clicked the wrong chart. "That's not possible." Her expression didn't change. "I'm sorry. I've been here every week. I understand." "No, you don't." That came out sharper than I intended. She flinched, not because she was offended, but because she recognized the sound of a person discovering they've already been erased from somewhere that mattered. "I just need to know if she's okay," I said. The nurse lowered her voice. "You'll have to speak to the family." The family? I was standing there. I had handled bills they didn't even know how to read. I had signed forms, answered calls, argued with insurers, sat through consults, and I was being told to speak to the family. I walked to the hallway window near the elevators and called Lauren again. This time, she answered. "Why am I not on the contact list?" I asked. Silence. Then she said, "It was easier this way." Easier? I looked down at the parking lot, at the rows of cars shining under the winter light, and for one strange second, all I could think was that I had paid for the private room she was probably sitting in right then. "For who?" "For everyone," she said. That should have been the moment I understood everything. It wasn't, because even then I was still trying to grant her grief the benefit of complexity. Only later did I check my call history closely enough to see the pattern. The hospital had tried to reach me, more than once. The log showed incoming calls routed through the main line, then an internal note about updating family preferences. then a secondary contact sequence that no longer included me. One billing alert had been forwarded to my email and immediately unsent at the sender's request. I only found that because my company archive kept deleted traces longer than people realize. A nurse's note referenced "aunt requested at bedside," followed by a line that made my stomach drop even now when I think about it. Family requested communications go through mother only. Mother only. They had not just forgotten me. They had redirected me. That was the midpoint, though I did not have words for it then. It was the point where guilt stopped sitting cleanly on my shoulders and began splitting open into something more complicated and much harder to survive. I didn't fail her. I was blocked. And once you know that, every memory before it rearranges itself around intent. The missed call became different. The silence became different. Even my mother's voice at Thanksgiving, "You weren't there when she needed you," became different because I could hear the craftsmanship in it now. That sentence wasn't grief speaking. It was strategy. It was what you say when you need everyone else to think you suffered honestly and someone else failed morally. What would you have done if the people you trusted were rewriting your story while you were still living inside it? I didn't confront them that day at the hospital. I wish I had. I wish I had marched into the room, demanded answers, made Lauren look me in the face while I asked why she had removed me. But the truth is more humiliating than that. I sat in my car in the parking garage and cried so hard my ribs hurt. Not because I thought I had lost my place, because I finally understood I had been losing it quietly for months while I was still paying to protect all of them from the consequences of their own chaos. The proof started gathering itself after that. Billing statements, authorization logs, transfer confirmations, emails from specialists copied to me because I was the guarantor on accounts my family later pretended I had nothing to do with. And then the number emerged, $4.6 million. I knew it was a lot before I totaled it. I just hadn't wanted to count what my love for that child had cost in a language my family might finally respect. $4.6 million. ICU days. Out-of-network surgeons. Air transport. Experimental treatment approvals. Pharmacy escalations. Emergency interventions in the middle of the night. I paid because she needed more time. I paid because every extra day she stayed alive felt like something holy. I paid because no one else around me knew how to make systems move, and I did. And still by Thanksgiving, my mother was looking across a perfect table and acting like I had not even shown up. The invitation had felt wrong the minute I opened it. Not because families shouldn't gather after a death. They do. Sometimes that's the only way grief can pretend to survive its own shape. But this one had a quality I recognized from childhood: too neat, too deliberate, too polite. My mother had even handwritten a note at the bottom. "It's time we all sat together." That sentence sounded less like comfort and more like stage direction. From the moment I stepped into the house, I knew I had been right. The air was too careful. My mother hugged me for exactly the amount of time a person hugs when they want a witness to remember they hugged you at all. My father took my coat but didn't ask how I'd been. Lauren said hello without meeting my eyes. Mark opened a bottle of wine with more force than necessary and never once looked directly at me until we sat down. The chair they had set for me was across from my mother, not near Lauren. That mattered too. People who want harmony seat you near the wound. People who want spectacle seat you where the accusation will carry best. Dinner began normally enough, if you didn't know what normal looked like in a room full of liars. Someone commented on the turkey. My father asked Warren about work. Aunt Denise brought up weather because women like her always try weather first when they sense a room is unstable. I could feel the folder in my bag leaning against my calf under the table, the paper inside heavier than paper should have been. I had not decided exactly when I would speak. Only that if they forced the moment, I would not leave empty-handed again. Then my mother did exactly what I knew she would do. She waited until everyone was seated, waited until plates were full, waited until enough ordinary conversation had passed that what came next would feel less like an outburst and more like a truth finally spoken. Then she put down her fork and said, "You weren't even there when she needed you." That sentence did not just land. It spread. Across the candles. Across the serving dishes. Across the people who had heard soft versions of it for weeks and now suddenly had the hard version placed right in front of them, plated and undeniable. Someone stopped chewing. A fork touched china too hard. Lauren looked down. Mark went still. No one defended me. and that hurt in a way I had expected but still wasn't prepared for. There is a special kind of loneliness in watching people choose silence not because they're certain you're guilty, but because they're uncertain enough to stay safe. I reached into my bag. My mother watched my hand, not because she knew exactly what I had brought, because she knew I had finally brought something. "What are you doing?" my father asked. I set the folder on the table. Brown leather, clean edges. The sort of folder he would have respected if it had belonged to anyone but me. "What is that?" Aunt Denise asked quietly. I opened it. One by one, I laid the documents down between the gravy boat and the cranberry sauce, turning them outward so everyone could see. Transfer confirmations, hospital invoices, payment authorizations, escalation approvals, guarantor statements. The room didn't freeze all at once. It tightened in sections, like people's bodies were understanding before their minds could catch up. My father leaned forward. "Rebecca, that tone used to stop me. It didn't now. You want to talk about where I was?" I asked. My own voice sounded unnervingly calm. No one answered, so I put the final page on top. The total, $4,600,000. Lauren looked up so fast the chair under her scraped the floor. Mark said, "What is this?" I looked at him. The truth. He reached for one of the statements. My father reached too. I covered the stack first. That was the shift. Not the amount. Not the gasp from Denise. My hand over the paper. For the first time in my life, I interrupted my father's access to the story before he could rearrange it. "No," I said. "You don't get to touch this until everyone sees it." My mother's face changed then. Not to grief. Not to shock. To exposure. I turned to the table. These are hospital billing records. These are transfers. These are signed treatment authorizations. These are emergency approvals that were sent to me because I was the one paying for her care. Silence. I looked at my mother. "Every day she stayed alive," I said. "I paid for it." Nobody moved. The sentence did exactly what truth does when it arrives at a table that has spent weeks feeding on implication. It made every previous sentence sound filthy. Mark sat back slowly. Denise covered her mouth. Warren looked from the stack of papers to my father, with a kind of disbelief I had never seen him direct at family before. Lauren whispered, "You paid all of that?" I kept my eyes on her. "Yes." She started crying. Not loudly, just a crack. The kind that comes when reality enters too quickly for a person to reorganize around it. For one brief second, I felt sorry for her. Then I remembered the contact list. The rerouted calls. The way she had answered the hospital question with, "It was easier this way." My father found his voice first. "That does not change the fact that you missed the call." There it was. The last refuge of people who know the larger lie is dead. Retreat to the smallest surviving point. Defend the one detail you think can still hold moral weight. I looked at him and pulled out my phone. Then I opened the hospital log. Then I turned the screen toward the table. "It does," I said. "When you see the part where the hospital tried to reach me more than once and your family redirected communication through mother only, I let that sit. Then, I didn't fail her. I was blocked." No one spoke. Not because they didn't understand, because they did. If you knew the truth would destroy the family story in front of everyone, would you still say it out loud? My mother's eyes filled then, but even through the tears I could still see calculation. We were trying to manage things. Manage. That word almost made me laugh. As if a dying child were a scheduling issue. As if my removal were administrative housekeeping. "You were managing me," I said. "No," my father cut in. "We were protecting Lauren." That was when Denise looked at him with open disgust. By lying about Rebecca, no one answered her. Mark reached for the top invoice again, and this time I let him take it. He scanned the line items, the hospital names, the dates. Then he looked at Lauren. "Did you know?" Lauren cried harder. "Not all of it." That was probably true. But not all of it is a weak shelter when you benefited from enough of it to stay comfortable. Once the documents were on the table, the room could not be reset. That was the real power shift. Not that I raised my voice. Not that I won. Not that somebody apologized. It was that the old family mechanism, deny, soften, redirect, move on, finally failed in public. My father tried first. "This is not the whole picture," but nobody listened to him the way they had 30 minutes earlier. Because numbers do something to family lies. They strip emotion off the argument and leave structure behind. $4.6 million. Logged calls. Authorization history. Routing changes. Timelines. My mother's version of me had always depended on ambiguity. Difficult. Cold. Too busy. Not there when it mattered. The receipts murdered ambiguity. Denise read the totals again and again as if repetition might make them smaller. Warren stared at the authorization pages. Mark held one billing statement in both hands like it might cut him. Lauren kept crying, but not in a way that moved the room toward her. It only made her look late. For years, I thought if the truth ever came out, I would feel triumphant. I didn't. I felt tired, clear, and very, very done. My mother reached for the oldest trick she had. "We all suffered," she said. That sentence had always worked in our house because it turned accountability into cruelty. If everyone suffered, then naming one person's damage too clearly could be made to look selfish. But my Aunt Denise said, before I could, "Not like this." It was a small sentence, calm, final, exactly the kind of sentence that changes a room because it comes from someone who has never said anything sharp before. My father looked at her as if betrayal had arrived from the wrong direction. "You don't understand what this family went through." Denise held his gaze. "I understand enough." Mark set the invoice down and asked Lauren, in a voice that sounded emptier than angry, "Why was she removed?" Lauren shook her head. "Mom said it was confusing. She said too many people were involved." There it was. The family logic in one clean line. Too many people were involved, so remove the one doing the work. Too much was happening, so cut out the one asking questions. Too much grief, so choose the person easiest to blame. I looked at Lauren and saw, maybe for the first time, what it costs a person to stay the favored child too long. She had never learned to distinguish comfort from truth. She had mistaken being protected for being right. My mother was still crying, but it wasn't working. The table had crossed some invisible line. Tears only matter when people still believe your version of events has moral weight. "They made me think it was my fault," I said. No one interrupted. That sentence was not for my parents. It was for me. It was the first clean thing I had said all night. They took one missed call and turned it into a story about who I was to her. I looked down at the hospital bracelet in my hand. I had pulled it from my bag somewhere during the last 10 minutes without consciously deciding to. Thin plastic. Her name. The edges pressing lightly into my palm. "She knew who I was," I said. That finally broke Lauren. She covered her face and started sobbing in a way that sounded younger than she was. Mark didn't touch her. My father stared at the table. My mother opened her mouth to say something comfort. Defense. I don't know, but nothing came out. Good. Some rooms deserve silence. I gathered the papers slowly. Not because I wanted to leave dramatically. Because they were mine. The folder, the receipts, the proof, the years they represented. My labor had funded almost every extra day of that child's life. And now even the evidence of it had to be taken back carefully, because I no longer trusted anyone at that table with anything that belonged to me. "What happens now?" Warren asked. It was the first honest question anyone had asked all night. I zipped the folder closed. "Nothing for you," I said. Then I looked at my parents. For me, everything changes. No speech, no revenge monologue, no demand for apologies I would never believe. Just a line, a boundary, an end. My mother whispered my name the way people do when they want the intimacy of a first name to stand in for repair. I didn't answer. My father said, "You can't walk away from family." I looked at him. Family. He had used that word to remove me from a hospital room, to rewrite me at a funeral, to accuse me at a holiday table, to protect himself from the shame of being seen clearly. "Yes," I said. "I can." Then I stood up. No one tried to stop me. That mattered more than any apology would have. Outside, the air was cold enough to make my eyes sting. The neighborhood was quiet in the post-dinner way. Suburbs get on holidays, front windows glowing, cars lined up, somebody laughing faintly from a house 2 doors down where, for all I knew, another family was managing not to destroy itself over pie. I walked to my car and sat behind the wheel without turning it on. For a minute, I just held the bracelet. My phone was still in my coat pocket. I took it out and looked at the missed call one last time. 2:17 a.m. For weeks, that screen had felt like a verdict. Now it looked different. Not proof that I failed. Proof that they needed me to think I had. You should have been there. That sentence had followed me through sleep, through showers, through grocery store aisles, through meetings where I pretended to be listening while all I could hear was my mother's voice. At first, it sounded like guilt. Then it sounded like grief. Now, finally, it sounded like a lie. I tried. They made sure I couldn't. If this hit something personal, tell me where you're listening from. I cut them off completely after that. No dramatic announcement. No long email. No negotiation. I blocked numbers, returned unopened cards, stopped attending the events where my presence had always been useful, but my humanity conditional. Lauren called from a different number once. About 2 months later, I let it ring out. She left a voicemail I still haven't played. Maybe one day I will. Maybe not. Grief does not obligate reconciliation. Neither does shared history. Sometimes love for what was real has to live separately from the people who made it unbearable. The only object I kept from that whole period was the bracelet, not the cards people sent after the funeral. Not the framed photo my mother mailed to me 2 weeks later with no note, as if mailing me a curated memory could somehow replace the ones she had tried to erase. Just the bracelet. And the call log. That's what I mean when I say the ending wasn't clean. I did not get my niece back. I did not get a family transformed by truth. I did not get the kind of apology that reaches the right bones and changes the architecture of what happened. What I got was smaller and, in some ways, harder. Clarity. Irreversible distance. The knowledge that I had loved that child honestly in a room full of people who loved leverage more than truth. Months later, I took the bracelet out on a quiet Sunday morning and set it beside my coffee cup while rain tapped against the apartment windows. I stared at it for a long time and realized something I hadn't let myself admit before. They had used her death against me, but they had not taken my place in her life. They had only lied about it. That distinction saved me. Because once you understand the difference between losing the truth and watching other people misuse it, you stop begging the wrong people to restore what they never had the decency to honor. I put the bracelet back in the drawer after that and opened my fridge. That detail may sound small after everything else, but endings are made of small details. There was leftover soup, a bag of salad, the expensive cheese I only buy when I remember I'm allowed to enjoy ordinary things. Half a pie I hadn't touched yet because I had been too tired the night before. No one had to ask me how much I'd already given. No one was about to turn grief into accusation. No one was waiting to weaponize what I did or didn't do for someone I loved. I heated the soup, sat at my table, and let the silence stay honest.